Episode 1. The Boy Who Would Face Hannibal. They said no one could stop him. The Carthaginian general Hannibal, riding at the head of his army of war elephants, had crushed Rome's mightiest legions one by one. At Trebia, at Lake Trasimene, and most brutally at Cannae, where the fields ran red with Roman blood. In just a few years, the unstoppable force of Hannibal had brought the Republic to its knees. But deep in the ashes of that humiliation, a single spark of hope was born. A young man whose courage, intellect, and audacity would change the fate of Rome forever. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio. When Scipio first saw war, he was only 17. It was the Battle of Cannae, 216 BCE, the darkest day in Roman history. His father's army, nearly 80,000 strong, was annihilated by Hannibal's brilliant double envelopment. Scipio watched the slaughter unfold, surrounded by chaos and despair. But while senators and generals fled in terror, Scipio didn't. He rallied a small group of survivors, drew his sword, and swore an oath before the gods that he would never rest until Rome was victorious over Carthage. That single vow would define his destiny. In the years that followed, Scipio's rise was nothing short of extraordinary. At just 24, he volunteered to lead the war in Spain, a campaign so dangerous that no other Roman dared to take it. The Senate laughed at his youth and inexperience, but the people, desperate for a hero, voted him in. And when Scipio arrived in Spain, he didn't just fight Hannibal's brothers, he outthought them. In 209 BCE, Scipio launched one of the most audacious attacks in Roman military history. His target, the city of New Carthage, Hannibal's main supply base in Iberia. Protected by high walls, a garrison of 25,000 soldiers, and a natural lagoon barrier, the city seemed impenetrable. But Scipio saw what no one else did: the tides. He realized that when the waters receded, the lagoon's shallows would open a hidden path straight to the city walls. As dawn broke, Scipio's legions launched a frontal assault, distracting the defenders. Meanwhile, a small group of soldiers slipped through the lagoon, scaling the walls in silence. By the time the Carthaginians realized what was happening, it was too late. The gates were open. The Romans surged in. In less than a day, Scipio had captured New Carthage. He freed hostages, returned prisoners to their families, and treated captives with dignity, a shocking contrast to the brutality typical of Roman war. Even the Spanish tribes began calling him Scipio the Kindly. But make no mistake, behind that calm, noble face was a master of strategy and psychological warfare. Scipio studied Hannibal's methods like a scientist studies nature. He adopted the enemy's tactics, speed, deception, adaptability, and refined them. He turned Roman rigidity into brilliance. When his soldiers hesitated before battle, Scipio told them stories of courage and destiny, igniting their faith in victory. And slowly the tide of the war began to shift. By 206 BCE, Scipio had driven the Carthaginians out of Spain entirely. He returned to Rome a hero. Crowds filled the streets shouting his name. Yet even in triumph, Scipio's mind was elsewhere. He knew that Rome's survival required more than defense. Hannibal still ravaged Italy, undefeated. To win this war, Rome would have to strike at the heart of Carthage itself. The Senate called him reckless. They said no Roman had dared to cross the sea since Regulus's disastrous invasion decades earlier. But Scipio's reply was simple: fortune favors the bold. And so, with the weight of Rome on his shoulders, Scipio set sail for Africa, toward the enemy's homeland, toward destiny, toward the man whose shadow had haunted his life since youth. Hannibal Barca. As his ships vanished over the horizon, the wind carried a single thought through the legions. A whisper that perhaps, at last, the gods had sent Rome its answer to Hannibal. But Africa would test him in ways he could never imagine. What awaited there was not just war, but the ultimate clash between two of the greatest military minds in history. Episode 2, Scipio versus Hannibal, the Clash of Titans. The sands of North Africa shimmered under the scorching sun. On one side stood Hannibal, the master of tactics, the terror of Rome, the man who had once turned entire legions to dust. On the other stood Scipio, a young general with an unbreakable belief that Rome's destiny was his to shape. Their confrontation was more than a battle. It was a duel between genius and fate. Before facing Hannibal, Scipio struck deep into Carthaginian territory, defeating two of its armies and forcing the great city itself into panic. Yet he wasn't only a warrior, he was a diplomat. He forged alliances with Numidian princes, most notably the brilliant and unpredictable Massinissa, who brought with him the finest cavalry in Africa. With these allies, Scipio created something new, a Roman army that could... Episode 2, Scipio versus Hannibal, the Clash of Titans. The sands of North Africa shimmered under the scorching sun. On one side stood Hannibal, the master of tactics, the terror of Rome, the man who had once turned entire legions to dust. On the other stood Scipio, a young general with an unbreakable belief that Rome's destiny was his to shape. Their confrontation was more than a battle, it was a duel between genius and fate. Before facing Hannibal, Scipio struck deep into Carthaginian territory, defeating two of its armies and forcing the great city itself into panic. Yet he wasn't only a warrior, he was a diplomat. He forged alliances with Numidian princes, most notably the brilliant and unpredictable Massinissa, who brought with him the finest cavalry in Africa. With these allies, Scipio created something new, a Roman army that could finally match Hannibal's speed, flexibility, and cunning. But the Carthaginians were desperate. They recalled Hannibal from Italy after 16 long years of campaigns. When he landed on African soil, even Scipio must have felt the tremor of destiny approaching. Two men born enemies bound by the same obsession, victory. Before the battle, the two generals met face to face. Imagine that scene, the aging Hannibal, calm but weary, and the youthful Scipio, confident but respectful. They spoke not as monsters, but as mirrors of one another. Hannibal, the lion who had once humbled Rome, warned Scipio not to challenge fate. Scipio, in turn, told him fate had already chosen. They parted knowing that only one would live to see glory. At dawn, October 19, 202 BCE, the Battle of Zama began. Hannibal had war elephants, 80 of them, thundering toward the Roman lines. Scipio calmly ordered his men to open corridors in the ranks. The elephants charged through harmlessly, scattered, and were cut down. Then came Hannibal's veterans, the same soldiers who had crushed Rome at Cannae. But this time, they faced an enemy who had learned every one of their tricks. Scipio's legions advanced in perfect coordination, supported by Massinissa's cavalry attacking from the rear. Dust and blood filled the air. When the final clash came, the battlefield was chaos. But within that chaos, Scipio saw patterns, opportunities, moments to strike. He adapted in real time, like Hannibal once did. And when it was over, the impossible had happened. Hannibal, the undefeated, was defeated. Carthage surrendered. Rome stood supreme, and Scipio, only 31 years old, was hailed as Scipio Africanus, the man who saved Rome. But victory came with a shadow. Scipio, who once united Rome through courage and mercy, would later face jealousy, politics, and betrayal. His enemies in the Senate accused him of corruption, of arrogance, of wanting to be a king. He refused to beg for forgiveness. Instead, he left Rome forever, saying, "Ungrateful fatherland, you will not even have my bones." He retired to a villa by the sea, where he spent his final days in quiet reflection. Yet his legacy endured. Scipio had not only saved Rome, he had changed the art of war forever. His blend of strategy, diplomacy, and humanity would inspire generals from Julius Caesar to Napoleon to Eisenhower. They say history remembers the victors, but Scipio's greatness was not only that he won, it was that he understood his enemy, respected him, and rose above vengeance. In defeating Hannibal, he didn't just save Rome, he proved that courage guided by intellect can reshape the world. If you find this video adding value to your life in any way, please take a moment and subscribe and like. And if you want to go further, write one word: value. It helps with the algorithm so other people who need it can find it. It's free and a simple way to give back. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Thank you.